I'm Mark Sweeney at Advertising Week Europe. I'm joined by David Jones, the Global Chief Executive of Havas Worldwide. David, one of the things you mentioned in your talk today was Paul Polman. You called him potentially the Steve Jobs of the next decade. Tell us a little bit about that. It's a big claim.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for me, we're living through an amazing inflection point in the world of business. And I think, people have basically been empowered by digital and social media to hold businesses and leaders accountable. And in the future, in my view, the most successful businesses will be those who are the most socially responsible. And I think we're seeing a number of leaders emerge, what I call the green-blooded capitalists. And Paul Polman is probably the best example of that. Here is somebody who has basically said, we want to double our revenue, but halve our carbon footprint, and who has put social responsibility at the heart of business strategy. And he's done it in a very big business. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy, but it's much easier to be socially responsible when you're a small business, but when you're one of the biggest companies in the world, it's much harder. And I think the great news for the world at large is that we're starting to see real signs of success. The share price is performing very well. As they said in their recent earnings, they've created a company in the last couple of years the size of Heinz or of Campbell's, and I believe that social responsibility will be to the next decade almost what creativity and design was to the last decade. So before Apple's success, creativity and design was not a boardroom subject. They made it one. I think we're at the start of a similar movement with social responsibility in business. So I think 10 years from now, if he manages to achieve what he set out to do with Unilever, he may very well be looked at in the same light Jobs was.
Well, you talk about some of these businesses, but I mean, Apple tripped up, didn't they? They had various issues which were outed in China. They weren't whiter than white. So there's always going to be another business out there who might not be practicing proper sort of ethic business practices. So if Paul Polman does it, what's to say he doesn't just get undermined by a number of other companies who get away with it?
I mean, I think what we're really seeing is an amazing shift. And I think we're seeing, companies almost at the simplistic level. We had the age of image and social responsibility in business, which was all about, let's pretend we've changed and we haven't really. BP being the prime example, changing their logo to a flower. We then had the age of advantage, and I think Marks and Spencer's with the Plan A, Polman, great examples of that in terms of saying, okay, we think there's genuine competitive advantage in this. And I think we're now heading into the age of damage, which is people can now hold you accountable and sanction you, whether you're a leader, whether you're a business. And every week there is a new example, be it at a big picture level, what we saw with BP and everything that happened there, Deepwater Horizon, with news and the hacking scandal, with some of the issues around the BBC recently. American Apparel and Gap both tried to exploit Hurricane Sandy for their sales. They got absolutely taken apart by people using the power of social media. Similar thing, Bank of America and Verizon brought in new fees that people didn't like. People are able now to fight back. And I think what it's doing is it's changing the new rule of business. And that almost, for me, the new price of doing well is doing good. And if you don't set out to be more socially responsible, you will no longer be able to perform. So I think it's not about business as usual and you can carry on being a success if you practice that. Business has to radically and fundamentally change. And I think we're seeing that happen. And I think we're seeing more and more examples of the people and businesses who are being more socially responsible actually outperforming their competitors.
I've got one more question for you. You've carved the niche out. One Young World is brilliant. This is a thing you talk about quite a lot, about social responsibility and ethic business practices. Havas is not the biggest of the holding groups. It's got a lot to do. Are you saying that if you had, I don't know, an ExxonMobil or something come to you in Latin America, you'd say, no, your ethics aren't good enough? Do you have a list of companies? I will not work with you. I will not pitch for you. Is this just talk? Can you really afford to have this position when it comes to your business?
So there's about 5 questions in one.
It's one question. It's one question. Are you a fraud?
No, the first one is, Havas. I'm not in for any second suggesting we are perfect and that you can't find an example. Hey, you're working with that company, and we've got 316 offices around the world. So I'm sure somewhere we're working with somebody who you might be able to find, isn't whiter than white in this space. So this isn't about saying Havas is perfect, everyone else isn't. What this is about is saying I think we are seeing a fundamental shift in the world, a fundamental shift in the world of business, and we want to be one of the key players in that. So it's we believe in using the power of creativity to drive and affect positive change. Are we perfect? By absolutely no means. Do we want to be at the forefront of this? Absolutely. And I think the point about size and scale, We're a big global company, 16,000 employees, over $2 billion in revenue. We work with 72 of the top 100 advertisers, so we can tick the big box. But for me, the most interesting stuff in the world today is not going on in the big end of town, it's in the small end of town. And if you look at when revolutions hit industries, it's actually the person who has the biggest legacy business who is the biggest casualty. You know, Kodak were the biggest in photography. Right. We know what's happening in the journalistic and news world. You know, we know what's happening in the music world.
We find.
So you know, I think actually, you know, look at, you know, we have like probably 5-6 times more employees than Facebook. No one goes, hang on, they've got 1 billion users, how do they do that? You look at the size of, you know, Instagram, sold for $1 billion, 13 employees. You know, in the new world, and it's actually a broader issue, but in the new world, you don't need thousands and thousands of people, and I think it's much better to be nimble, agile, entrepreneurial, and fast than it is to be big and bureaucratic.